So I'm here with Hugh Collins Rice to discuss how these wonderful pieces for clavichord came about. We've just, in fact, recorded them in my music room, and we're fresh with the experience of putting together as it were, the finished performance, at least in terms of its sound. For this video. So Hugh, I'd like to ask you a little bit about the pieces, the process of writing them, how that came about, the unusual choice of the clavichord and so forth, and just generally to give us a taster perhaps of what one might expect listening to them.
Cool. So choice of the clavichord is probably the big one. So I've always liked writing for unusual instruments, unusual combinations of instruments, for the simple reason that the sounds they make are already very interesting.
Good.
And the clavichord is a prime example of this. So it's very familiar, it's a keyboard instrument, but it's also very unfamiliar because the sounds that it produces and the quality of tone that it has is very distinctive. So it's unlike any other piece I've ever written, I think, from that perspective. It has a particular set of challenges because it is for the clavichord. And I hope, what I really hope is that it is for the clavichord, that it works for the clavichord and is a clavichord piece.
For sure, I think it is. Obviously, as a clavichordist, I'm very heartened to hear that its distinctive voice and distinctive character is known and appreciated, especially with a composer. And also, as an instrumental timbre, it is quite unusual, perhaps less familiar in certain ways. And the extent to which it is a clavichord piece and perhaps not a generic keyboard piece, a piano piece or whatever. Perhaps we could explore that a little bit. What do you think are the qualities in the pieces that make them so specific to the clavichord?
So I think this takes us straight to the titles of the pieces and the source of them, which are these wonderful sets of pictures by Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham, which were the starting point for them. So the whole approach of an abstract artist where the materials are form, line, colour, structure, which are already very musical things. And one of the qualities of the clavichord is this extraordinary sense it has of each individual string having its own quality. So it's already like a painter's palette in some ways. So it draws you to thinking about colour, line, all those things that make up the qualities of an abstract painting. So the connection for me was very strong, it was very vivid, and the pieces sort of grew out of that conjunction between instrument and the stimulus of the Barnes-Graham pictures.
That's fascinating. This particular instrument is made by Andreas Hermet about 5 years ago, and it has a particularly clear timbre, so I think it suits these pieces very well, and you can hear the clarity of the pitches and also the very, as you've already said, the distinct character of different regions, the sort of soprano, alto, tenor, bass, and more extreme regions. And you've written very much with those extremities in mind. So each of the pieces balances out the timbre and the compass of the instrument, which is very good. Obviously, in Baroque and classical times, when these instruments were being used, there was a certain interchangeability of repertoire between different instruments. So organists would have performed at home on the clavichord as a practice instrument, and eventually the clavichord found its own very specific repertoire, particularly with Emmanuel Bach. And of course, one of the pieces, the fourth piece, is called a fantasy. So indeed, all the, as it were, musical titles of the pieces have resonances, which are particularly current, let's say, to that 18th century thinking about the instrument. Perhaps you'd like to say a little bit about that, the way in which the pieces combine titles and visual images.
So this was an important part right from the beginning. So each of the four pieces has a dual title. One of them references sets of Barnes Graham pictures, and the other is a purely musical one, as you've said, which is very current for the clavichord repertoire. So Fantasia has got connections with that CPE Bach repertoire because of just the sorts of ways that it uses material, and that was a very deliberate choice. There is a prelude, there is a fuga, which are of course absolutely core types of material for types of movement for the period of the clavichord. And the other one is the Siciliano, which is a rarer beast, but otherwise it's a keyboard suite. So the relationship between the art and the music had to be balanced. These are not pieces which simply replicate the work of art. They are musical forms, but they are musical forms which are informed by my response to the paintings. So it's not program music, it's not illustrative music. So even the most illustrative maybe is the first one, the Glacier one, which has this very cold sort of sound world to it. It is also very abstract, and it's very musically driven in terms of its form. So it has an arithmetic chain of pictures. So this is very abstract, but is also performing this role of connecting with that cold blue sound world.
Certainly, I found the first piece the most clear in terms of its colour and the coldness as well, but also it has a great richness as the piece develops. So one of the first things that I recognised was that my touch had to be quite controlled in the variation of pitch. So the device that we call in clavichord playing Bebung, where you introduce a certain vibrato by pushing on the key to cause the pitch to rise slightly. To get that cold character at the beginning, it's quite important not to use that effect or not too much. But I must say that the way you've written it with slightly jagged, should we say, grace notes, begins to draw us towards the image straight away, the images of the Barnes Graham pictures, and her interest in small details, and also details which were, as it were, not in the sky, but on the ground, or where she was walking, or in nature. And this is quite interesting because, of course, the piece begins very high up and demonstrates these kind of fissures in ice or glaciers. So for me, the images are very strong. Perhaps that's the performing musician in me. But then the abstraction is also very liberating for a performer too, because one can't connect direct images to everything, and one wouldn't want to. Therefore, there's a creative response, I think, to the juxtaposition of material in this particular piece, the prelude.
Yes, and there's also something very linear about it.
Yes.
So the one of the things that's very striking about that particular series of Barnes Graham pictures is the way that the lines create the structures. So some of them are very blue, some of them are very grey, but the thing that often goes through them is the clear lines. And that thing about So there is a wonderful documentary by Mark Cousins, which talks about her looking down rather than looking up, and indeed connecting the glacier with the broken ice of a puddle, where you get these very, very clear fractures in the ice. So that linear sense, and again, the clavichord is I think brilliant for this. Those linear descents that you keep getting in the piece, which are an entirely musical structure.
Yes,
Then they
yes.
don't illustrate a glacier in any way, but the clavichord gives an incredibly precise sense of them as a line, which I really, really like. And they're often coloured occasionally by octaves, which is part of the abstract process, but the octaves also help to punctuate that sense
Right.
of linearity, I think.
Yeah. How did you accommodate dynamic with writing for the clavichord? Famously, the clavichord has arguably the widest dynamic range of any musical instrument. If you take into the fact that at its lower range of hearing, it goes completely into silence. But of course, on the louder spectrum, and in terms of projecting its sound, let's say in a concert hall or even a small concert venue, this isn't an instrument that's really meant for that sort of listening. So it takes the listener into a completely different realm. How did you find controlling and writing for the dynamics within a piece, for example, like the Prelude?
So it's
Glacier.
a real challenge. But it's quite a good discipline because it's very easy to cover up weak compositional ideas with strong dynamic contrasts. So you really do have to make the sorts of things that are associated with dynamic change. So structural contrast, they have to also to be there in other ways as well. So as you know, I wrote lots of dynamics on the piece. I wrote fortes, but I know that the fortes are not going to be as loud as they would be on a Steinway Grand.
And in fact, you're quite controlled, I think, in the way that you don't write a lot of dynamics. So there is the forte piano contrast, some pianissimos as well, maybe mezzo piano also. But there's a sort of respect there for the tradition of playing, which is dictated partly by the player, but also by the instruments that you're playing. Some instruments will do certain dynamic shapes at certain points in their compass and others won't. So there has to be a sort of trust there that the dynamic is not absolute, but it's relative to what's going on in the piece. And I think that discipline is quite significant over the course of the four pieces. It's almost as if one is learning a particular technique of responding to dynamic within the pieces, which I found quite interesting. And the other thing about dynamic too is that for many instruments, I imagine a composer can produce a particular dynamic marking for maybe an orchestra or an orchestral player, and that will affect the way in which they'll play a particular passage, not just it's not just a sort of on-off switch of dynamic. And whereas here one is in much less well-charted territory from that point of view.
So I was as careful as I could be to connect dynamic with things like register and the number of notes per second. So register and density become part of that dynamic landscape, and they have to change, not in lieu of dynamic change, but in conjunction with any dynamic change that is kind of possible within the framework of the instrument.
And also, as the player, one has to interpret those instructions in ways that obviously make sense to me musically, but also make sense with the instrument. And in a way, it's the linearity of the music that's more important, because when you play, it's hopefully not like editing a CD where one's kind of doing slices of music put together, but it's the lyricism and the sense of line which is all important. And that brings me on perhaps to the second piece in the set, Fuga, which is struck me as having small, very lyrical shapes. There's quite a lot of jagged music in there and very dramatic music, but the fact that I really needed to play in long phrases, this becomes even more accentuated in the third piece, the Siciliano. And then by the end of the set, the fourth piece, the Fantasia, concludes with a series of considerably long lines which are slowing as well. And this, I think, is very exciting as a player because it causes one to really generate a type of touch and control of the instrument, hopefully, which maintains that almost that orchestral sheen, perhaps, of the stringed instruments playing all together, but quite quietly. So colour and resonance also demands a technical response from how we play the instrument, how we get from one note to the next.
So that linearity, I think, so we can, with the fugue of 6 lines, we can go back to the Barnes-Graham on that, because the linearity of those pictures is something which is immediately striking. And there is something which is innately musical about them as well. And so there are several pictures of that type. Some of them are called 6 lines, some of them are called 8 lines. I think there are maybe some that are called 12 lines. Now, I don't know about you, Terry, but my first thought about that is it's very much like motet in 4 parts, motet in 6 parts, fugue in 6 parts, motet in 12 voices. It already has got, it's very musical. And the fact that she did 6 lines and 8 lines, you know, that difference, the extra 2 voices that you put into the landscape, I was really fascinated by. One very interesting thing that I have recently become reacquainted with those pictures is that Lynn Green, her biographer, has said that Barnes-Graham at one point connected one of these pictures with Bach. So I feel I'm kind of closing that circle and bringing them back to Bach, though of course the music doesn't sound or behave anything like Bach. It's not meant to, but that sense of musical counterpoint creating a visual image, and then that visual image creating a different sort of music. It's a connection which I think is, well, I find it very attractive one.
That's very interesting because, of course, a fugue in its the word fugue in its earlier forms can also mean flight, and so there's something about the energy of the piece, vivacity. We know from the marvelous Mark Cousins film that's recently been made a little bit about Barnes-Graham's character and personality, vivaciousness, and I think that comes through coincidentally quite strongly within this music. So not a fugue in a contrapuntal sense, but a fugue in...
Well, it's in 6 parts, or it's in 6 lines. Maybe that's a better way of putting it, but the lines are not always there. I mean, it would have been really impossible for you to play if I'd had 6 independent things going on at the same time.
I sense 3 lines most of the time.
So some of them get rubbed out, some of them get rejoined. So there is a notional sense of 6 lines. Some of them you're playing to with, as you do in Bach unaccompanied cello pieces, right? You're playing several lines with one musical line, and Yes, the fugal aspect is a little bit more oblique, I think, but I wanted that sense. So one of the principal characteristics of fugue is that the subject comes back in different voices. So that sense of the material of the piece being able to be in this voice or this voice or this voice. And there are a number of patterns in the piece which recur through it, which is I don't know, it's a fugal temperament, if you like, that it has the tendency to do that. But it also has a very architectural linear structure from the Barnes-Graham straight lines, twisty lines, interweaving lines. And of course, most obviously the left to right sense of starting high and the picture moving down.
So this is very important. So I saw the paintings with these lines. So some of them look a little bit like a horizon seen from a slight angle. So there's a diagonal aspect. Then you have these beautifully drawn curved lines, which to me seem like mountains, almost mountains below the horizon, I attempted to produce my own version of a couple of these paintings, just drawing them, and I discovered immediately how difficult it is to draw a straight line, and how even harder it is to produce a wavy line and to have that sort of control, that draftsmanship. And that was quite helpful in approaching the learning of the second piece, for ways in which one can sort of imitate that control and again sense of line, which is not immediately a musical thing, but maybe it's an intellectual thing, but also something to do with technically what one does, say, with the arm. So there's a sort of mixture of images and potentials there.
Yes, so that implication of landscape again is very interesting. The glacier pictures are obviously very connected with landscape, but have also got a high level of abstraction, and most of them would in fact produced miles away from the glacier and sometimes years away from Barnes-Graham's visit to the glacier. And then these linear pictures which look like they can look, some of their iterations do just look like lines, and then as you say there are others which look like landscape, or I think for her they were particularly shorelines, so working in St Ives she was looking out of the window, seeing sea and the waves and the so on, and abstraction, representation, Fantasia, more descriptive title, all of these things I think are interesting. So that twin track of the landscape and the abstract, or for me in these pieces the pictorial and the musically formed, it's a richness which I think is good. It's rich.
Sure. In the third piece, the Siciliano, we have the lyricism, if you like, emerges even more strongly, with two very clear statements of what we might call the Siciliano melody, followed by a fiendishly difficult passage, which contains sevenths and ninths in scale. In scale patterns, so all of a sudden the lines become fissured or completely change in a remarkable way. So again, where is all that coming from, do you think?
Well, again, taking it back to the Barnes-Graham, so the images that this movement connects with, they have various titles, but the most appealing musically is the ones that are called connected forms. and they have two very clear, or sometimes more than two, but in terms of the Siciliano, two is the important number. Two very different geometric shapes, which are then connected by lines or bands. And one of the things I wanted to do with that piece was to create two musical entities which were connected but were distinct. And you have explained very well their distinction, and it's also about response to the instrument as well. How do you make an instrument like the clavichord lyrical? How do you make it sing? After Rachmaninoff too, how does a keyboard like this project a line with the same sort of quality? So that was a challenge for me. How could I, and a challenge for you in terms of playing it as well. So the lyrical side of that was important, and then to make the two forms distinct, the obvious thing is to go in the other direction. So the fiendishly difficult bit is designed to push the instrument in a very different way, and that's, I don't know, it's cadenza like. It plays that sort of role,
definitely.
and that and again, it's a type of writing that not necessarily the notes, in fact, definitely not the notes, but that sense of creating flourishes of sound, which I associate with 18th century keyboard music. And I've heard you do plenty of them in 18th century keyboard music.
Well, absolutely. And notationally, it's very helpful that you use slur lines, I think, in both sections of this piece.
Okay.
Because it connects the fact that a clavichord won't really play with clarity quite as quickly as a harpsichord, say. So if you do want to play fast notes, you need to make sure that each of the fast notes are long enough to have a quality and a sound and a pitch. And if you just play with very rapid up and down movements of the fingers, then you don't really get any sound at all. You just get a blocking sound. So it's quite interesting that the connected forms, the connection in a way in that movement, are the slur lines for me, which respond, make one think very vocally, actually, as if one were singing them. And often, if one approaches a technically difficult passage and tries to play it too fast on historical instruments, then you lose the quality of your touch and tone. So to have those slur lines, which would never have been present really in Sebastian Bach or Emmanuel Bach, that came a little bit later in musical history, is very useful, I felt, to the player, but also made the connection, which you kind of see with some of the paintings.
It's a very visual thing, isn't it?
Exactly,
you can always imagine the slurs and the bars.
So you have straight lines, and you have these curves, these semicircles. And even more amusingly, as I discovered watching the Mark Cousins film, is that there's a backstory to these pictures as well, which is not what you might expect.
So again, there's this dual thing between representation and abstraction. So again, according to Lindgren, Barnes-Graham's biographer, these pictures are connected with a series called Jeff and Scruffy.
Yeah.
And Jeff was one of Barnes-Graham's friends. Scruffy was a big dog. So there's a sort of a buried portraiture aspect. It's obviously the two forms of a man and a dog, interestingly different, but they become abstracted, and then in the connected forms pictures, they're obviously you've got to know that there's a connection with Jeff and Scruffy. I think otherwise you're not going to.
So there's quite an image there for listeners to conjure with as they listen to the third piece, ostensibly a Baroque dance, but a Baroque dance for man and dog.
Again, it's that richness, the layering, and the
And moving on to the fourth piece, which is slightly more extended, and has was in fact the first piece that I saw. It's the piece that you wrote first. So I sort of thought of it as number one, and it was the first piece that I began learning. So it was my introduction into the style of the four pieces, sort of preparing me for the other three in a way, which that are highly contrasted, and so that was though they have similarities of technique, obviously, but actually each of the pieces was a surprise when it arrived, because it was so different from the first.
They share
a very positive
notes.
surprise.
I think they're all based on an 8-note chord.
Right. Okay.
So there is a kind of pitch material that
runs through them.
Yeah. Which again is quite abstract, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And Barnes Graham, of course, dealt with colour as somebody with synesthesia, dealt with colour in a way which was both a response, but also by devising extraordinary technical means with which to precisely use, combining a letter system with different colours, which I didn't know about until I watched the film, which was even more fascinating to me because it represents exactly what performers and composers do, which is to try and control elements of expression in very specific ways, whether they're looking for colour or form or line or any of these other aspects. So that was quite revelatory to me as somebody who hasn't got that synesthesia.
No, I mean, me neither. And the synesthetic aspect of it's one that I don't particularly relate to, but that process of, I mean, every time I see art, the process of creating it along the lines that you're talking about Barnes Graham doing with these ones, I'm thinking that's just composition. That's what we do to get to writing a piece, and that connection I often find extraordinary, because the difference between producing a 6-minute movement and a canvas or a print or whatever seems to me to be miles away, and yet those initial stages of how you get there can be amazingly similar.
Yes.
How do I make the material?
Yes.
How do I organise it? How do I shape it?
Yes.
And some of the devices are in fact very similar. So the fourth movement here has got Fibonacci proportions in it, which is a thing that a lot of abstract artists, including Barnes Graham, use. So there's an immediate connection there. And that thing with letters and manipulating them to get to a finished material. Substitute notes for letters, and you get to a process very much like the one I used for the Glacier picture.
Exactly.
You started off with a string of notes and moved one here, moved one there, and then do the process again, move one here, move one there, and it's spookily similar.
Yes, absolutely. And the connections, I in a way, the big difference, of course, is how one deals with time. Obviously, paintings have a perception of time, they have a perception of depth and space, but obviously your music is operating within linear time, which is a very, very different thing. So that everything is how should one say, laid out. It gives itself up to a certain sort of abstraction, and we haven't touched on the use of colour yet, which is very striking in the Scorpio paintings, which are connected to the fourth piece, and also actually the colour in the Siciliano, the third piece as well. But I was very taken with the Scorpio pictures, the fact that there is a layering process. There was also a printing process. So became more analogous to that idea of musical time,
Yes.
where one, maybe not so much as a composer, but certainly as a performer, responds and reacts in the moment, and sort of layering, putting new touches onto it to see, well, what does this suggest? Well, it suggests something further. And yes, so maybe that's something the performer brings to your pieces rather than you composing into them.
There seems to be something very performance orientated in those school period pictures. You're very aware of the brush strokes,
Absolutely.
and you almost feel that they're being made.
Yeah.
I mean, no, they can't be being made while you're looking
Yeah.
at them, but the brush strokes seem so vivid
Yes.
that it almost feels like it has only
Yes.
just been made.
Yes.
And yeah, so I think that is an interesting connection. Yeah.
Good. Well, Hugh, thank you very much for joining me for this interview. I hope it's been helpful and interesting, and helps listeners to get to know better these amazing, wonderful pieces that we've been recording today. And also thanks, of course, to the Barnes Graham Trust for the use of images in connection with the final film.
Indeed. And thank you, Terry, for your wonderful playing.
Pleasure.
Absolute pleasure.
My pleasure.
Hearing
Wow,
you.
thanks for writing them.